Yay. Well, we've got quite a flurry of people here already. Welcome, Kalia. Welcome, Jennifer. Welcome, Charles. Welcome, Adine. I think we're going to go ahead and do the formal start. We've already done the informal warm-up start. And then people will be joining us because we do have a lot of people who signed up, and we also have a lot we want to do. So Andy, over to you to start leading us through what is it that we're doing here?
Okay, well, first thing, just to introduce everybody to Co-Intelligence Institute for anybody who doesn't know who we are and what we do. So Co-Intelligence Institute is a non-profit focused on promoting innovations in collective wisdom, co-creativity, and collaborative governance. So this means we're developing tools and resources, including pattern languages that help individuals and communities live in kinship with one another and the rest of the natural world. As part of this, we love to feature what others are doing with regards to collective wisdom and choice making. So through this, we explore, gather, and share real-world innovations through books, articles, and case studies. We also collaborate with other initiatives within the larger change ecosystem. We seek to both contribute to and learn from our collaborations while encouraging a greater understanding of the whole. And last but not least, we welcome people into learning communities, like on this call today, where we can all deepen our understanding of the lenses of co-intelligence and wise democracy. And we want to develop our capacity for wise relating and living well together. Back over to you, Rosa.
Thanks so much. So we call these real world co-intelligence calls, and we want to highlight the work of practitioners while also engaging in this collaborative process of reflecting and learning. And a bit more about co-intelligence theory and wise democracy pattern language are inspired by the work of real practitioners on the ground, right? And so because of that, examples from practice can be really helpful for illustrating the theory. And so we want to center the practice, and at the same time, the theory and the patterns offer us useful tools so that we can generalize the insights that we gain from experience. So after I have the opportunity to introduce Indra, our honored guest today, and we will be doing a bit of an interview / presentation. Then Tom will be offering a short piece on the theory and the patterns he's seeing. And while all that's happening, I'm going to be inviting all of you as participants to be considering the following questions. What are you resonating with and why? And what do you have questions about, or what would you like to hear more about? And what connections do you see with your own work? So after Indra and Tom, we'll be going into short breakout groups, triads, where you just have a chance to kind of begin to share a little bit about that. And then we'll come back to the main circle. You'll share out. Indra will get a chance to respond to some of your responses. So Andy is just putting the flow for the call up there. So thank you, Andy. So with that, I want to introduce Indra. She's the founder and co-initiator of The Alternative Global. And this is a socio-political platform for systemic transformation, publisher of the Daily Alternative News blog, developer of Cosmolocal Agency Networks, or CANs, which are now being interconnected with one another. And Indra is also a socio-psychotherapist, writer, and consultant on soft power. Her book, oh, should have had it right here, The Politics of Waking Up, Power and Possibility in the Fractal Age, is a very deep and thoughtful read, and she's done a lot of consulting with various governments. You can read more about all of this in the Eventbrite. So with that, Indra, I just want to say thank you for being here today. And yeah, and my questions, just framing questions for us to start. We had a little pre-call where we were kind of warming up a bit. So there's where you are now, and there's how you got here. right? And just kind of inviting you to share about both. And also what's worked well and what lessons can we learn? What lessons have you learned that you can share with us from things that have been difficult or challenging along the way? Because I think we learn from everything, right? So these are very broad, general, open questions, and wherever you'd like to start.
Right. Okay. That is a big question. So maybe most useful to know what is like the driving force of my work, and that would be the lifelong exploration of where is my agency? You know, what and where is my agency as a human being? And the reason that became such a huge focus for me was, you know, from young days experience of having to face a lot of death. Several members of my family died while I was in my teens. My brother, and then 6 out of 7 of my mother's brothers and sisters died while I was in my teens. And although I was given a convent education and I had a strong belief at the time in the church and in God, all of that crumbled while I was in my early teens. And I actually ended up, as young people do, you know, making up my own religion. And making up my own concept of what power is and where we are in time and space, as children do, or might do. But as my life unfolded and I went to, through my educational experience, and I also went traveling after I went to uni and so on, I discovered Buddhism for the first time in my early 20s, and a lot of my questions were answered there. But I wanted a bigger, if you like, social answer to where does my agency lie? So when I was in my early 20s, I trained in conflict transformation, which was a very specific form of conflict learning with Johan Galtung. I don't know how many of you know Galtung. He gave me a lot of insights into cultural and structural power, what that is, how it shapes everything. I also spent theatre director. I learned a lot about the power of the arts. Later on, I explored the concept of soft power, which I might go into a little bit more as this unfolds. Soft power in contrast to hard power. So hard power, really guns and money and the power of force. Soft power, the power of influence and attraction and the power of narrative. So I became a consultant in soft power in my early 20s. This is all unfolding rather fast. Later on, I was convinced really that unless I looked at the political realm, if I didn't look at what politics, the role of politics in all of this, that I would be, missing the major part of the power structures. I joined a political think tank. I wrote some papers around party politics and this function of party politics as we know it. And then most recently, I jumped out of that party political culture, if you like, and asked the big question: if politics is broken, what's the alternative? And that sort of really, brings me up to date. I know it's a bit helter-skelter, but there's a lot contained in all of that, as you can imagine. I'll let you draw it out, Rosa, as I know you will. But now, having done the alternative for about 6 years, we're going into our 7th year now, I could say that I think we're coming to some conclusions that there is a genuine alternative to the party political structure that we have now, and ways of being in the question that I sure will be able to talk about today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Indra. It's such a fascinating biography, life journey. And I just want to briefly comment that, you know, agency has been there since the first, right? In your first question of where is your agency being impacted so deeply by the early death of your brother. And that agency shows up in these CANs, right? Community agency networks, right? Where you're looking at how do we support other people in finding their agency too. And this question of if politics is broken, what is the alternative? And just really looking forward to hearing about what your learning has been from these CANs and where you are now. Absolutely.
So shall I just launch into the story of that? Because yeah, there's two things I think that that I want to draw attention to. You know, one of them is that the past 30 years, the way we look at it is that we've been in a revolution for the past 30 years. And that revolution really could be most simply aligned with the birth of the internet. Through the birth of the internet, this has profoundly impacted the agency of people, of every person who has access, if you like, to this level of connectivity and information access. It's more than what's happened is it's more than the fact that people have access to information and to each other so that they can mobilize. I think the most profound change that has occurred is that people have been able to see themselves and place themselves in the public sphere. And before that, the vast majority of us were sort of hidden to ourselves. And we were very subject, or almost entirely subject to the mainstream narratives that were being offered to us through the media and through the structures of authority that we were all in. So most of us would get information from above, information that was selected for us by our bosses or by our parents or by figures of authority that arrives to us, having been pre-selected in a way and edited for us. Once we had access to the internet, we began to be proactive in finding the information that we ourselves were looking for. And with the development of social media, as I said, the vast majority of us who felt ourselves hidden from the public sphere started to occupy that public sphere and be able to generate new social imaginaries for ourselves. We could imagine new worlds, we could imagine ourselves in those worlds, and that has profoundly affected our sense of agency. Now, of course, that's been accompanied by a really, strong sense, of the chaos of our world, but also a waking up, if you like, to the cultural and structural architecture that keeps us, in our place. We've woken up to the reasons why we're so unequal. We've woken up to the reasons why we live lives that we feel we've never chosen. All of this is now available to us. So we're experiencing this as chaos, but it's history will show that it's somewhere between chaos and a slowly developing ability to observe our reality in a very different way than we could before. And that has generated some kind of agency, maybe not the one that we imagined when we were yearning for it before the birth of the internet.
Okay, well, this is fascinating, and I'm really appreciating your sharing this larger conceptual frame with us of this ongoing revolution for the last 30 years and how it's affected our sense of agency. I jotted down, occupying the public sphere and proactively looking for information and access to one another, imagining new worlds, and this ability to observe this reality that now includes ourselves. These are all really, really profound descriptors of the change that is happening. And within that, given our short time frame, I wish we could do this for hours and hours, but we're starting. I'm very curious about, your experiments in the interface of your own agency and other people's agency in this phrase that you've used of cosmolocal, right? Of supporting this cosmolocal organizing and what you've learned from your own role as a catalyst of this.
Yeah. So, as we were part of this great, and we continue to be part of this revolution ourselves. So even within the 6 years that we've been doing the alternative, we've been slowly realizing. And one of the things that I should anchor this with is the first of all is the understanding that only 2% of people in the UK, but also across Europe and actually in the States, are members of political parties. Now, why does that matter? Some people would say, yeah, but everybody's political, and far more than that get involved and vote eventually when it comes to once every 4 or 5 years. But the 2% means that there's only 2% of people who are actively creating the dominant narrative that comes out of power. And that's the same narrative that is being fed on by the social media. Sorry, not by social media, but by the mainstream media. So for most of us, we've been living in this story of our own powerlessness for most of our lives. And the way that we've been fed and our society has been shaped is that we've been persuaded, ritually persuaded, that when we're trying to get our needs met as human beings, that the real, the way to get them met is to buy stuff. We've been convinced that we can get our emotional needs met through buying things, and also by getting, if you like, being on the hamster wheel that enables us to buy things. So we've been in that story, the vast majority of us. But once we started to look ourselves at the question, if politics is broken, what's the alternative? We committed to looking outside of the 2% narrative. And what we saw by really working our networks, if you like, and asking the right question, asking questions, which stemmed from the first thing that really was at the core of the question is, who is the human being at the heart of our politics? And where does that lead us to? So the human being at the heart of the old politics is really Homo economicus, the person who needs material, a roof and a tax cut, basically. So it's a materially defined entity. However, if we look from the question of the human being as a biopsychosocial spiritual entity, a complex system in itself, then we start to look and inquire around all of those networks that are developing and answering those needs in our wider society to see, where the news really should be coming from. What we observed when we were looking properly outside of the 2% bubble of information, we noticed the phenomenon of people coming together to resolve problems and to develop agency, at a community level that was never really being reported by the mainstream at all. So the mainstream would have it that it's natural for us to be divided. We fall into the left and the right naturally. We're for and against issues. This is the way that we saw, and that division in our society was natural. However, when we observed, if you like, call ourselves systems conveners, we start to observe what we're really seeing appearing, and the phenomenon of people coming together at community level, in systemically, holding systemic information, looking for solutions to not only their own the problems as they arise within their community, but they want to see how this impacts the individual citizens, and they want to see how it impacts the planet as well. So this phenomenon, you'd recognize, transition towns maybe, or eco-villages, or municipalities that are, particularly developed, cooperatives, many networks of networks, which show the phenomenon of people coming together to solve the big problems for their communities, and increasingly always trying to become more diverse in the way that they do that. The cosmo-localism of it is really the way that it's grown in the last 30 years through the internet, to mean that there's no such thing anymore really as local. You know, we now have our heads in the cosmos and our feet on the ground, and the information that we can share and the way that we can gather and the way that we can build in our communities can now be informed by examples from all over the world, but also, you know, there is a global commons of tools and practices that we're all drawing on. And we can be diverse in our communities in ways that our community itself is not diverse. So this, you know, this is something that couldn't have been anticipated really. We were trying to fix the problems politically in the past. We stuck in a way with what we had or what we believed we had.
Yeah, thank you. May I recap a little bit of what you've shared and then ask you to go further in a particular direction? Would that be okay? So you started with this thing about only 2% of people members of political parties, and yet having this undue influence on the narratives that we're hearing. And what I was thinking when you were talking about that is, yeah, only 2% of people are actively involved in what the parties then put out, right? So it's not a crowdsourced, like these are not crowdsourced parties, right? And so this thing of looking at, I'm going to jump a little bit to, you're noticing that around the world, there's been this phenomenon of communities coming together, whether it's transition towns or eco-villages, or the cans that you and your collaborators have been working on, people coming together as in order to meet their needs. You have this beautiful image of feet on the ground, yet heads in the cosmos, because we can draw on this global commons of practical tools that we have access to throughout the internet, which allow us to find all kinds of information and then adapt it and use it in our local context in whatever local way that we need. And so I really appreciate, and then that we're not just looking at people's economic needs, but people's socio-psycho-spiritual needs. And so I'm really curious. I appreciate your connecting the cans, not just with the work that you're doing, but with work that's been sprouting up all over. And I'm really curious on a local level, from your experience in working with cans in your area, what some of the highlights have been, what some of the wonderful magical moments, and maybe what some of the challenges or lessons learned, you know, through what didn't work, like that, if you would be willing to share any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the difficulty for us as systems conveners, you know, people who observe the phenomenon and then want to be ourselves builders, to experiment, is that we will always be observed in a way as outsiders, or people with an interest. You know, too many times before the bad experiments were really us going to places, trying to start something, and realizing very quickly that our behavior was to extract information from people, and then go away and, you know, write papers on it and find it all very interesting, but not really change anything at all. So we often would try to begin something, and people were very distrustful of us, and really rightly so, because we were guilty of that behavior, of trying to create our own story and sell it in a way. You know, this is what's happening. So we've learned much better now to really only see ourselves as igniting something or framing something, but always working with somebody in the area and making sure that that person already is well connected to the area and feels capable of somehow becoming responsible for whatever happens. Everything we do is a question of igniting and stepping away, and always insisting and emphasizing how whatever gets generated is either paid for at an early stage, if there might be some funding for it, so that people feel that they have a, that they have a reason to turn up in the first place. But then afterwards, whatever's generated should be co-owned by the people who live in the place. And so this is not an easy thing to do, to try to do an experiment with local people and then in a way that they can always own it themselves. That's one of the challenges. The second one is that whenever you go to a town, so let's use Plymouth as the example of the first place that we went to try and do this. You need people who can somehow introduce you to that space. But you'll find that the people you're naturally meeting are what we have come to fondly call the usual suspects. They're the people who have been doing this work for some time, and they have largely become, because of the political structure, problem-orientated. So they're really working in the community to help solve problems. And what we're trying to do when we're thinking about agency is somewhat beyond that question. It's a little bit beyond how do we solve the problems of this, that this community is facing. We're trying to do something that is more long-term agentic, which is, in a way, how do we bring this community back to life? How do the people in this community reclaim themselves, experience self-sovereignty, begin to become creators of their own future? This is how it's really a systemic challenge. And so the kinds of ways of working are less to do with, for example, something like a people's assembly that might want to bring a big issue and then and then vote on it. We're more inclined to, use music and food and camaraderie and try to bring people into relationship with each other through the joy, in a way, of, and the profundity of meeting people that you haven't met before, that care about the same place that you're living in. You're generating something that's more like a feeling, and a hopefulness about the future that you then might apply to what do we want to do here, as a group of people for the future, and then what might we begin to build together? That is really the basis of a community agency network, more than how do we solve the problems that the past served up to us. So the first time I was involved in doing something like this in Denmark, I was just delighted by the kinds of things that this community were doing in Bornholm. For example, they would regularly have what we call dance-offs. So a dance-off was when, different groups of the community would bring their favorite music and play off against each other and see what kind of a reaction the people in the audience had. What was the most popular music, what gave the most energy, what was, and when this kind of energy would arise in a room, that was a good time to ask big questions. And you probably know that we've been working with this tool, Paice, in our communities, which is a way really, and we're working with Andy at the moment in Wandsworth in the UK. It's a way of offering a question and allowing people to co-create the shape of that question and let it slowly unfold within a community to show the community its own diversity, so to speak, without it ever ending up in a yes or a no or a right or a wrong. It's the showing a community back to itself. And that's more the thing we're trying to generate in our community agency networks. Within that kind of a space, people can offer their own gifts in a very different way. young people can offer their gifts in different ways. Older people, I mean, people can simply offer what it is that they are and that they've maybe wanted to do as a project, rather than how do we solve the housing crisis, which to some extent I'm inclined to not let our authorities off the hook for their responsibility for things that our taxes should be paying for. But the idea of bringing people back to life is that they should also begin to dream of a future that they want to hold themselves responsible to, and begin to shape government from that space.
Thank you. Indra, when we did the little pre-talk, you had mentioned these 3 stages as friendly, futuring, and canning, right? So the friendly, where people are just having fun and connecting with each other more broadly, not just the usual suspects, but really reaching out to bring people together across differences. And then you were just talking about the futuring, of beginning to have a sense of shared future. And then the canning was almost like the practical, like how do we put food away, like actual, can the apples from the apple orchard, or whatever else might be a really useful way of meeting the community needs, while also still keeping the friendly and the futuring in mind. So is that still a format that you're using?
Yeah, absolutely. So the friendly is also, it's quite subtle really, because the friendly builds on this desire for a relationship, but it doesn't not achieve any agenda or narrative at all. I mean, we do a process called the anti-debate, in which we actually meet beforehand to try to find the right question, and then we put a question to people who've gathered, and we do some very gentle what we call tableauing. Right, tableauing is achieved through asking a simple question, get people to stand in a line, from negative to positive on that question, and then get them to speak to why they're in that position. It's an opportunity to tell stories. So people tell their stories about why do they feel like this, right, about this question. And then sometimes we do a cross axis as well, asking people how confident they feel about what it is that they've just said, or what it is that they feel they've just committed to bringing about. So we do some light, friendly, easy relationship building, but it's not without any meaning and purpose at all. That's the first kind of gathering. The second one, which is the futuring part, is we invite people to dream forward into what kind of a town or a city do we want to be. But we then invite people to put what they're imagining could happen on the map. So quite often we'll have a map on the floor. So a map of the town that you're in will be on the floor as you're downstairs. Yeah, I'm also put it on.
Andy, could you please? Yeah, thanks. Yes.
So
down there unless it's cold.
I'm having a dialogue with someone now. Right. So you might say, I wish, we had a place to meet, where we could have this kind of discussion regularly. So, but then you said, but where on the map would you put it? Where would you put that in this town? Right. So it's really an exercise of bringing people from the map in their heads or the dreaming to the territory, like put it on the ground somewhere, so that you can see it happening and you can imagine building it actually. So this kind of, existential shift from I wish to okay, where is a very important piece of the journey of becoming responsible for that place. But then the third part of it, what we call the canning, is, it's more than local things that we're talking about. I mean, there could be, you could set up you could have decided to set up a festival, for example. You might have said, we want to generate our own energy system, or they might say, we want to answer homelessness in this city. So then they're not small things that people come up with, but they have the opportunity to be systemic within the place that they're in. So in that room, if you've done your job well, you have people who might have a lot of needs, but you also should have people who are capable of bringing some resources to answering those questions. And resources might be anything from knowledge, you know, to actual, you know, business resources, or you know, some sort of you know, idea of how you could take something to the next stage. So then there's small, but there's often large projects come in. And then there's the cosmo-localism, is the commitment to the research, to the bringing in of blueprints and so on and so on, that that mean that it can be a very broad range of things. The can part of this is really the need for a container. We call them, they are community agency networks, but what we're referring to is the need for containers of the, you know, of the very diverse forms of agency. What we see is that, you know, it's the many different forms of agency that need to be somehow within a container that give them traction. You know, without a container, like when you're just working in the broad internet, you know, it's very difficult to get traction on the idea, and you'll end up working with, you know, people of the same kind. But to really get that diversity of different forms of agency to move into systemic building, you need this container function of the CAN.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that level of detail with us. It's super helpful and inspiring. I particularly am struck by this, you know, idea of people talking about, oh, well, yes, we need X. And you're saying, well, where would that be, you know, and having a map and being able to ground it. That is just really beautiful, along with all of the other material that you shared. I think we are just about ready to hear a little bit from Tom about what patterns of co-intelligence or what patterns of wise democracy are you seeing and hearing here?
Well, first of all, I've known Indra for, I don't know, more than a year, 2 years, I don't know. And I have never got so thoroughly, and it's not thorough anyway, not so thoroughly what she's about. And beyond the patterns, underneath all the patterns, this thing called the Prime Directive, which can be looked at as a guide for holistic leadership. And when she said igniting and stepping away, I thought that's the Prime Directive, which is appreciate, evoke, and engage the wisdom and resourcefulness of the whole on behalf of the whole. That's exactly what she's doing. The whole pattern language is built on that. Now I'm not surprised how many, dozens of patterns that I came up with. It's really hard to narrow it down to talk about them in this thing. Also beyond the problem solving, how do we bring the community to life, to experience themselves as co-creators of their future? That's also Prime Directive. You know, you are drawing out what's there, enhancing it, zapping it up, you know, to take itself over. And I had the challenge at the beginning of this to try and look at patterns that connected it, particularly connected to the wise democracy pattern language and the wise democracy vision, and also patterns which characterized what felt like the uniqueness of the program, what made it different from all the other programs floating around. And the patterns that I came up with for its uniqueness centered on felt agency. And the pattern heart for felt agency says, passivity and powerlessness serve neither quality of life nor wise democracy. When people see their voices and actions playing a meaningful role in public life, they experience an expansion of self and greater willingness to participate. So notice how social designs and activities contribute to or undermine participants' sense of agency and support empowerment. And that's, I mean, hello. That is so much what the cans are about, and the fact that it's rooted in your your personal history is fascinating. So that makes one of the most fundamental things I could think of in the pattern world. And the pattern language has a thing called glocal subsidiarity. And the word glocal is floating around. It's not dominant, but it's floating around in the conversations already, a combination of global and local in various ways, think globally, act locally, etc. And subsidiarity is that you assume the center of gravity is at the local level, and that people are power and management should be done as local as possible. And if it can't be done locally, it goes up. You can't manage the oceans locally, so it goes up further, to federal or international, whatever. But it's still focused on the governance structure, kind of. And there's a funny way in which the idea that Indra brought to us of cosmolocalism, it feels like I need to change that pattern to just localism or something like that, and that it would include both subsidiarity and cosmolocalism. She has kind of, without intending to, enhance that pattern. So there's much more going on there than was actually included before, and I am humbled and impressed by that. And the complex identity is another one of the patterns in the pattern language, and she has, again, there's a sense in which she's brought more life to it. I have any entity, person, group, idea, system, etc., can be known through its essence, character, stories, boundaries, fruits, relationships, infinitude, and more. This is the pattern heart for it. There's all sorts of, we're not just one thing. And there's dimensions, about all these dimensions coexist and co-evolve in and around somebody. And we tend to oversimplify ourselves and each other, and to honor, support, explore, and engage many dimensions of everyone and everything. That is very much what she's doing at the individual level. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of needs, a lot of capacities, a lot of in every person. And what do you do with that? That becomes a fabulous resource for the collective work you're trying to do. And more sort of, there's also multimedia engagement, which I had to, looking at her slideshow. I won't go into a lot of detail. You can get the sense of it, but every step of her slideshow of how the process she goes through is, there's lots of different stuff going on that can engage people in different ways. People have different things that work for them or don't, etc. And the whole program, her whole CANS program, is just filled with that kind of stuff. And more in the, yeah. Shall I stop there?
Well, you can finish your sentence for sure. Go for it.
Okay, it's gonna be a long sentence. Nurturing social capital is another, generating shared orientation, partnership culture, realizing shared aspirations. These are all things which go with her. I will dump my whole list of all of them that I thought of in the chat, but we won't go over them. If people want to go into it deeper, we can do that later on. And anybody can poke around with what I'm about to dump in the chat.
Lots of great patterns that are very relevant to drawing out some of the principles that Indra is so beautifully embodying here. So with that, I'm going to unpin all of us here for a moment and or unspotlight. And we're about to go into breakout rooms. And
yeah, I'm just saying that some rooms is going to have 4, some 3.
Right. I've already made the rooms up, so it's.
Oh, you did it. Okay.
It's all set to go. I'm just going to open them in a moment, but yes, a few of them will have 4. And yeah, just it's not going to be super long. We'll have about 13-14 minutes in the breakout groups, and we'd love to hear from some of you afterwards, so feel free to take notes of your conversation if you'd like. What aspects have you resonated with? What do you have questions about or would love to hear more about, and any connections that you see with your own work? So opening the rooms, and yeah, see you all back here shortly.
So do you want me to join?
You can, or you can stay here, either way. I have so you had a friend who said that they hadn't seen you in a long time, and I had left them here. But they may have jumped off for a bit. Peter?
No, Peter's not here. I don't think, I can't see him now.
Okay. So I'm gonna put these folks in the waiting room for a moment.
There's two people in the waiting room. Sometimes people fall off when they go into breakout rooms, I noticed.
I know, I know. Hi, Michael. Would you ready to go jump into your breakout group?
Sorry, me?
No, I was just
Hi, my Zoom dumped me. Can you put me back in?
yeah, I'm not quite sure how I do that. I should have gotten some tech help. Slow, you were in
5 with Susan Clark and I don't know who else.
Susan Clark, so
I can do it.
Thank you.
5, right? I think so.
how did
Great,
you,
great stuff so far. Thank you. I'm thinking about the container stuff for my own.
okay, I don't know how you managed to do that, but I couldn't, like, I can see join, but if I join, then I will be leaving, and
yeah, I wonder if you gave me the ability to do that. I can move people around if I want to. Now we've got Michael on his own in a room. Miriam's coming back here. So quite a lot of jumping around.
yeah, okay, so that's all right. I'll leave them in the waiting room for now until
Oh, sorry.
oh, yeah, we can just leave them in the waiting room until we all come back. So, because I have a feeling that they've taken off. So how are you, Indra? How is this being for you?
I'm always surprised by what I say when I'm actually in a room. I don't know if you ever had that experience.
Uh-huh.
Every room I talk in, I say something different. I mean, I'm never saying the thing that and I think it was a little bit because you and I had a conversation before.
Uh-huh.
It may be that I wasn't repeating again what I said to you. This is, I know that happens. So there's Michael.
Michael, let's see.
Yeah, there was no one in that room, so
There was no one in that room. Great. So I'm gonna invite you to go to room 4 if I can figure out how to do that.
I can do it.
You can do it? Okay.
I don't know why I'm being able to do it and not you. There you go.
Okay, awesome.
The thing that I didn't talk about, which I maybe wasn't appropriate, but I didn't talk about the bigger picture of the incubators.
Uh-huh.
I guess we never got quite round to.
Well, you can, you'll have another time now after folks come back. So we'll hear from them a little bit, and then you can close with the incubators, which is kind of cool because that's like kind of the vision moving forward. Yeah.
Could do. Yeah. Well, let's see what this. The great thing is that they'll set the scene right for what it is.
They'll set the scene. So just so that you know, when they come back, we'll have about 10-15 minutes to hear from them. And then we'll have 10-15 minutes to hear from you. And then at 2:30, I'll just announce that, anybody who needs to go because they thought that was the end of it can go. And then we'll have a whole other half hour. So you actually have plenty of time.
Yeah, loads of time. Exactly.
And then it's being recorded.
As a reflection of lots of other efforts that I have seen over the years in local places, groups, and particularly in Portland, there was an organization called City Repair that did annual events and worked with local neighborhood groups. And the frustration that I live with is that my experience in getting involved or initiating these kinds of activities seem to be short-lived. That is, the people who even enthusiastically get drawn in and participate and have great experience that they are happy to express as a result of these activities, but then they go back. There isn't a sustainable energy in the community, even in the small segment of the community that is drawn in to keep it going or have that energy and have it grow within the community and to where it can have a real impact on ultimately dealing with the issues that everyone is concerned with.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adine. I paraphrased that in the chat as how to keep an initiative growing over time, alive and growing. And then Slow, I haven't posted that yet, but you posted something in the chat, and my brain was turning it into a question in a bit, like, how do we create these containers that are bigger, that include the consultants who are coming in, making an agreement with the locality or the particular community. Thank you both so much. Yes, Natalia.
Well, first, thank you, Indra. I so loved hearing about your work. It was really inspiring. Particularly what resonated for me was this idea of how can we bring the whole human self and not just this identity we've been assigned as like this economic consumer, and how can we engage more of that and evoke more of that in community and in decision making and co-creation. And I'm I started to like tease out some of the ways that you talked about doing that in these like smaller communities, the friends, and like creating that sense of connection and community, and meeting people on that level before going into sort of looking at larger issues. And I'm wondering what, if any, sort of insights or ideas you have about it's sort of connected to what Adine just shared, but like how could that maybe feed back into the larger political system so that people are more able to bring their whole selves into either transforming the system so that it makes more room for that, or just engaging more fully and through that, you know, creating a different direction for the political system more broadly, or if there's some way in which these smaller local groups could, you know, are having some kind of an influence or impact on the broader governance, which is so top down. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Tom, I see you.
Just as Natalia was talking, I remembered a conversation I had with my friend and colleague, Michael Dowd, who was the evangelical minister for a good chunk of his life, and then became an evolutionary evangelist, but that's a whole nother story. But he talked about people think that church attendance is where the strength of the evangelical movement is, because it's not where it is. It's in the community that's grounded in the Bible study groups, which happen in people's living rooms. And in the living rooms, people talk about how they're doing in their lives. And it says the archetypal support group, and people, the other people in the group are there for them. When anything happens in their lives that's difficult, they get support, considerable support. And when everything's good, they get celebrated. They're really engaged. And it's in the context of the Bible, but it's a real living community. And the sense that there's so many people who are leaving churches. We think churches are people believing in things that aren't really real and all that. There's so much else going on with churches as centers of community, centers of relationship. And churches get very powerful politically if they want to be. And there's a funny way in which Indra's vision and a number of other people's who are doing that kind of work, it feels like there's a function in society that could be held by that kind of thing where it has been held by churches in the past. And that vast amounts of meaning and potential interpersonal and social and political and economic power could arise. It was framed that way. I'm just thinking, check.
Thank you, Tom. So that's connected with a conversation that's happening in the chat here, which I'm going to read out loud. So I had written Slow's question about how to create a larger container that includes the work of the consultant. Susan Clark had shared some experience she has with that. She said, the projects I'm most proud of were a collaboration of multiple networks configured as learning networks. My team worked in service to the network of networks that in many cases lasted after our 2 to 3 year contracts were over. And then Slow was responding to his own question, saying, by finding the containers that already exist and the individuals, groups who are already doing interconnecting work in the community. So maybe you all may want to offer a little bit more about that at some point. And if there's anybody else. So what we're doing right now is we're hearing from a number of different people, and then we're giving the floor back to Indra so she can respond to some of these comments. Anyone else wants to offer something?
I can jump in. Hi, everyone. And I didn't intend this background, but I was encouraged to keep it by some in the breakout. Vestige from a Sun Ra festival recently. Just to say, I was struck, Indra, by your reference to the birth of the internet, and I just want to flag that in particular. And then we also had a nice exchange around cosmolocal and local, and that's quite alive for some of us in the breakout as well. So thanks.
Thanks so much. Yes, Susan.
Oh, thanks. And thank you all, Indra, Tom, Rosa, Andy, this is great. I wanted to go back to a question I had asked before we went into the breakout, which is, Indra, about as you're doing the work with these wonderful ways of letting people be a human community together, the role of grief. Some of you may be familiar with Joanna Macy, the work that reconnects. I'm just finding in my work, especially after what happened with the pandemic, that my kind of cheerful, we have more in common than we realize. If I wasn't creating enough space to have a community understand what needed to be remediated in the common soil, literally and figuratively. You know, we weren't getting more sustainable solutions. So can you tell me a little bit about how grief appears or doesn't in your work?
Great. So unless there are more questions, Laura, did I see you start to unmute at some point? Laura Rigel, were you wanting to offer something?
I was thinking about it, but I hadn't. But I'm happy to. Just one of the themes coming up in our conversation was around the relationship with party politics, and yeah, how to make sense of that. I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, great relationship with party
Good to see
politics.
you,
So
Indra.
I think we have a lot of questions here, great questions. And so I'm going to turn it back over to you, Indra, to go wherever you'd like to with this.
I think this might be the moment where I share some slides, because I just want to evoke, in a sense, a bigger picture within which all this work is happening. You might remember that I used this word social imaginary, and obviously we've evoked the system, you know, quite often. A lot of the work that needs to happen flounders in the face of a sort of reality that people think they're facing every day. So they may have like evenings, you know, in which they get together with people and generate good ideas and start projects, whatever. But then the next day, they're faced with the reality of their lives again, and you know, this certainty that they have no real power to change anything, and that they're really on the outside of some huge system that they can't possibly impact. And this slowly takes the energy out of what they're doing, and they imagine themselves as idealists and imaginaries. And you know, this is the psychological battle really that people are facing to keep going with the thing that they want to achieve. And I'm going to share the screen just to show you a sort of a process that we've been through and how we've been thinking this through. Right. Sorry if whoops, I always end up sharing my WhatsApp messages instead of my. This is the thing that I wanted to. Okay, so sorry. Yeah, here we go. So, you know, we've been conceiving of the social imaginary, or let's call this reality, through this kind of 4-quadrant perspective, which says there's, you know, that we're individuals in this task, but also we're taking part in collectives, we're taking part in whole systems. So we need to think of the individual challenge, but then we need to think of that as being within the wider challenge all the time. But we can't keep all of these things on at once, and that each one of these things has to be looked at and designed to give a journey, if you like, to each one of these quadrants. You know, people who study or who are aligned to integral theory will see this as the sort of Wilber's 4 quadrants, if you like. But so if you're looking at the top 2 are about the individual, and we're thinking about what is the internal state of the human being and how does that get to develop? And then on the top right, what is the behavior and the actions of that human being? And, you know, these 4 are really a depiction of our current multiple crises, you know, so the internal state of human beings all over the planet, in various degrees. I'm not saying, you know, all at the same level, but, you know, our well-being has been challenged all the time. Our well-being, some might say our well-being hasn't been strong. since the arrival of modernity. But you know, actually, the story of our loss of well-being is very dominant in our sense of ourselves, and we don't really know what actions to take. So on the top right, this is our loss of agency. We don't know what actions to take to face the climate crisis, to face social injustice, to face, you know, this is the lost human being, if you like. And then within the bigger picture of a crisis, maybe of values, you know, the stories about ourselves and how our values get carried is also a crisis of our media. That's bottom left. And then the bottom right there is the lack of structure to actually give individuals agency, or even communities to give them collective agency. All the power, if you like, is still at the top with governments and businesses. So all of this we did. I talked about already, just briefly, about the human emotional needs that need to get met. Somewhere in there is the question of how we're dealing with our grief. But when we begin to the human being as having emotional needs as well as physical material needs, then that is really the core of how the system changes. Once we acknowledge this human, how we're motivated by constantly trying to get our emotional needs met. When we understand this, it really is a shift at the core of the system that we're now going to try and design. Alongside that, this is all about the fact that we also have emotional resources, but I'm not going to dwell on this. I can share this slide deck with you another time. But that our capacity, our ability to grow our capacity to get these things met is also implied in this new idea of a human being. We're not flat, you know, like we don't have an identity that's stuck. We're constantly developing our capacity to get our needs met, but also to understand the society that we're living in. This is just a reference to the way that nature offers us patterns, but here's the cans that I was describing, the many forms of cans, which I think about as fractal. And we didn't talk about hard power and soft power, but I'm going to flip through these a little bit. So this being a new political axis, really, that I'm suggesting coming out of all of this work is the relationship between the complex individual, development of human agency, and how that has an impact upon our planet. And this here, I'm talking about the function of our imaginations to be able to create new worlds. But this is really where I want to get to here. After the 7 years, we come to this conclusion that that in this 98%, you know, there's a certain level of creativity is one way of looking at it, but maybe the ability to see get glimpses of a new future that is possible for all of us. And that when you can really get a glimpse of that future, some people call it the third horizon. When you can get a glimpse of that future and you start to invest in it and embody it, we see that as standing on planet A. So this is a new existential challenge, if you like. Can you put your feet on planet A? When you can do that, when you can sense this new future possible, you can place yourself in a way with others that are similar to you in this new space, and you begin to develop this as a new social imaginary. That becomes the energy, you know, for the work that you're doing, and it really changes your relationship with this. When you think that it's already here and it's something that you are already developing. And this year, in March, on our anniversary, we opened up these 4 incubators to really take and accelerate this idea of we can glimpse the future, but we need to build at least these 4 things to be able to give birth to that future that we're sensing as possible. So the 4 things respond directly to the 4 conditions I showed before. this top left one is about, how do we address our loss of well-being and our loss of capacity to face the current crisis that we're in. And we are actively now, we've got an incubator that is looking specifically at how do we design a new practice. We're calling it future being. This is a new practice for transformation. And how can we share that practice with people across our networks? Because I think without a personal practice, it won't be possible for us to find the strength, the kind of resilience, and to develop this agency that we're looking for. Top right is really about what are the things that we will be doing and that we're already beginning to do within the CANs. It's not simply the question of the formation of the CANs, but what are the practices that what is the behavior in those CANs? So what's the new kind of work we might be doing? What is the new energy that we might be designing? What is the food that we'll be growing? This emphasis on doing needs to be in a way mapped so that people can start to do rather than simply think about doing. This bottom left is the question of how do we share the story of that this is happening, because so much of the disillusion and so much of the loss of energy of things is that you can't see what you're doing being reflected back to you from the public sphere. You do something and you end up feeling it's very small and irrelevant because you can't see that other people are doing it too. When people understand that what they're doing in their community is also happening in Africa, is also happening in India, is also happening in Turkey, then they feel that they're part of a movement that they could spend the rest of their lives developing. It's no longer a project that either succeeds or fails. They're now living in a different mindset because they're reading about it. So the new comms and media system is something that has to be built and it's designed and built. And we're doing that in that incubator. And finally, the thing that maybe Laura was going to ask me about was, what is this new political system? It's not just a new political party. We're not talking about a new political party that takes part in the old system. That won't survive. There've been endless new political parties. A new political system is a new relationship between what is going on in all of this work throughout the can of cans, if you like, being connected throughout the world, actually. That really begins to exist as what we call a parallel polis. It has a kind of a anarchic agency of its own, and it builds a governance system whereby you can get not only ideas, but you can get decisions made across this parallel polis. When this is really built and loosely, I say loosely constituted, not firmly constituted, it can have a relationship with the current system in which the two are really mutually supporting each other. But in the end, I would say the parallel polis will be shaping the way that the political system works, because the voices of people will be, for the first time, able to be heard in a structured, architected way. So this is something we simply don't have at all at the moment. When a politician stands up and says, what the people want is this, he has no way of knowing that's true. There's no way for that politician to know that what he said is true. It's simply a projection, or it's a leadership that he's calling for something and people might gather in behind him. But he has no actual way of finding out what it is that the people are imagining, dreaming of, hoping will come into being, which certainly in this last 30 years or so has radically changed. What people want for their lives has even radically changed since COVID. So yeah, I just wanted to say that when you think about it in these terms, that we need a practice for ourselves, we need to capture new behavior and new action, we need a new media system, and we need to be able to loosely structure this new political system, then you get a much bigger sense of what the work of the CANs is actually trying to deliver. It's trying to deliver much more than a good feeling in your community. It's really doing whole systems change, actually without leaving the place where you are.
Thank you, Indra. That was a beautiful place to come to the bottom of the hour. I know some of you may need to leave because it said on our Eventbrite that this was from 1 to 2:30 Eastern time. And at the same time, we are going to be continuing for another half hour. So you're all welcome to stay for another half hour at least. There may be some diehards after that. So just wanting to acknowledge the time. I'm seeing a few people wave. If anybody wants to say a goodbye or a word or two as you're heading out, you're totally welcome to do that. And otherwise, if you can stay, that would be great. And I would love to hear responses and thoughts to the beautiful mapping out of all the elements of what we need for systems transformation, much of which is already in place that Indra has shared with us. Jack is saying he needs to run. Thank you for being here, Jack. Thank you. And Susan has a question about the parallel polis and is wondering how you are designing to include people with different types of gifts, classes, and income.
Yeah, I mean, everything is in design, rather, it's not a finished design. But the whole action of how do you design, how do you initiate a community agency network is specifically aimed at reaching the people that don't usually appear. So in the process of, creating your events, doing the 3 stages of friendly, futuring, and canning, you are constantly pushing out towards the people who aren't usually included. So that's the challenge, but it's built into the intention of everything that we're doing. When I mentioned at the beginning the usual suspects, what I'm not sure that I really emphasized was that that's not enough. The usual suspects are not enough. It's how you build out from there. First of all, to the people who are regularly excluded from nations that the usual suspects have. But then beyond that, it's very important to somehow find a way to draw into the can people who don't care about cans. People who don't even share your values. I mean, these can be, there are ways to presence those people in the can, but not at all for the reasons that you started your can, so to speak. So you might do door-to-door, offers. You can offer people, for example, in Stoke, we created a new currency. It was called countercoins, and we invited people to come to friendly events, and just for turning up, they would be paid in countercoins, and countercoins could give them access to free seats on buses, free cinema tickets. There was a payment for turning up, and what benefited us because then they were present in our network, and it benefited them because they got something out of it on completely different terms. The important thing was that they should be there, and that you're not only drawing on people who already agree and who already share values, because that leaves your community vulnerable to someone else coming in and hijacking their attention and their energy and so on.
Thank you so much, Indra. I really appreciate the response you gave. And then, of course, implicit in that is that you've done some legwork beforehand to talk with the cinema owners and to talk with the transportation company and to obtain their agreement for being able to offer those. That's a lot of the legwork of organizing. Thank you so much. Charles, you have your hand up?
Sure, thanks. I just wanted to drop in shine a little more light on the tech aspect, and I don't know if there's some quick way to summarize maybe two things. One is like the sort of insights or learnings looking back to the birth of the internet, which I think goes beyond the 30 years. But anyway, I trying to take a snapshot maybe beyond Polis, what other sort of what's the CAN stack, if you will, or especially around communications and like coordinating, of course, the in-person stuff. Just curious what that looks like, and the level of formality is sort of the lens that I'm asking through. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm afraid I may not be the right person to answer that question. And more than that, we're trying to build that now. You know, I feel that our technology is insufficient. We're using Hilo and we're using Lumio and we're using WhatsApp and all of this, and this obviously is very rudimentary, but it does have the benefit of people feeling comfortable with it and feeling that they are still, you know, autonomous with it. But Charles, we are just at that point now where we're, you know, we're in conversation with a lot of people who want us to move into the you know, the DAOs network and the blockchain and the, you know, there's a lot calling now, and we're in that moment, you know. But different hands have got different. They've got their own tech setup and they've got their own tech.
Okay.
You know, arrangements which are varied. Our interest is how we can begin to connect them up to each other, and this obviously has to be somewhat custom built, and it's going to require some investment. We need help with that.
Be in touch anyway. Good, thanks.
Thank you. Tom, you were next.
I sense some potential between Laura Rogell's project and your CAN's work, that there's sort of what Laura is working on is pulled together people who are kind of leading edge within the existing paradigm, bridging, community organizing, governance. Each of these has leading edge stuff going on in it. And she has those people, and they're looking for how do they fit together into some larger puzzle, some larger project, some activity or network or whatever, where they'll be synergized into being greater than the sum of them. And that larger puzzle is still invisible. We're still getting to know who each other are, what we're doing. But I have a feeling there is to have the kind of vision of what you're doing, not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it, the narrative within which you're doing it, might stir the pot in interesting ways with the people that Laura has pulled together, and perhaps have conversations, not just between Laura and you, but between people in Laura's network and people in your network. I don't know. It's just as I say, smell the bakery around the corner, kind of. There's something, I don't know exactly what it is, but it feels tasty. Check.
Always.
Wonderful. Andy?
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to say about the concept of the friendly, I think is a really great one. I've only been to one. When the Alternative UK was launched, I went along to the opening party, and it was a really friendly event, actually. Very, you know, lots of food, People, there was some really interesting sort of performance art that sort of broke up the scene, the evening a little bit and gave people some reflection. There were musicians, and yeah, you know, it was a really, I find it very inspiring event. And I think that idea of sort of getting people out of their their reticences or worries about talking to each other by creating a nice atmosphere is a really great way to go about it. And then I guess I've also got a slightly more pessimistic worry as well about the sort of the way in which our society, you know, we are reliant so much on consumerism, and people prefer consumerism over community at the moment because it doesn't require much effort of them. It doesn't, it's sort of the vulnerability of getting out there and meeting people and doing something different and new is quite challenging. So I kind of wonder, you know, I'm wondering, like, is this work really important though for sort of creating blueprints? Because I think there are moments when, you know, the shit hits the fan and we get, you know, like COVID, you know, those moments when people can't carry on in their usual activities, and then they say, oh, actually we do need each other, we need to sort of cooperate. And like during COVID, those sort of networks came about really naturally. And I think that is a difficulty, you know, the community organizing aspect when people are still stuck in these structures right now is not easy. And I appreciate the hard work that Indra's doing, because it is really hard work. So yeah, but laying down those sort of ideas and blueprints so that when people do find that they might have to shift and rely on each other and communities, I think is you know, is really valuable. Oh yeah, those are my reflections.
Yeah, just to respond to that, I think that's exactly it, Andy. Is that it's almost like you're creating new neural pathways for the community. You know, it's like, I think I'm trying to think of the exact example, but there was a number of examples around when these small neighborhoods, well, it is to do with the mutual aid communities, you know, when they've struck up conversations with each other and done a couple of things together because they had to, then, you know, in a crisis, or even if they had enough of a community relationship just to be able to loan each other things, you know, because they got into a WhatsApp group together for a reason. Then it turns out that when an actual emergency is on, they watch out for each other because they know they're there. It's literally the programming has occurred, and they know those people are there, and so they'll knock on their door and say, you know, are you okay? Whereas if they've never met that person, they won't go to look out for them when the time comes. I think reconnecting or reactivating what is probably a natural occurring thing, which is the way people care for each other and move towards each other, be interested in each other. This is probably a very natural human, well, I know for a fact that it is, because we are designed at the genetic level to become social, you know, because without society, we cannot survive. So the reason that we have these emotional needs specifically is because when we disconnect from society, this need comes to our attention. So a need for belonging, you know, or a need for status, you know, a need to be seen, a need for achievement, you know, need for these things can only really be found in relationship to other people. And then when we can build those relationships to other people, we also find that we will get fed, we will get housed, we will, you know. So we're designed actually to become social, thrive as human beings. What's happened to us in the way that our, you know, jobs and money have been organized is that we've been reduced back to being more like machine-like behaviors. And it's taken away the time we might have had to be human and social. And we're exhausted by the end of the day, just doing the work that was required of us to keep the machine going. So, I mean, even then, when we're in our offices, we're trying to break out into being social, and then we waste time, waste the company's time. So a lot of this is about reverting to our natural human behavior, because unless we do that, then then the dangers that we have created for ourselves through climate and so on, they'll be the end of us, literally, because we won't know how to work together. We won't know how to reach out to each other. We won't have any tools for cooperation or collaboration. All of this, in a way, is a kind of rehearsal, if you like, instant rehearsal for a better future, or one that will move us away from the cliff.
Thank you so much. And Andy, I am seeing that you are mentioning that Susan Ritchie on our call has a lot of experience with regard to catalyzing social capital in communities. I'm wondering if you would be willing to share some of that with us, Susan.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. When we were in the breakout, I was just sharing some frustrations around that. So I suppose my starting principle is the same as yours, Indra, and everybody else on the call, I suppose, as you make a better society. But I think over the years, it's been about how do you also make a better public sector? How do you make the people that are there serving those that are most vulnerable much more understanding and inclusive of the people that they serve? So that's where our focus is. And as you were talking, I was just thinking, I'm doing a piece of work at the moment in Brixton in London, which has got a really strong history, a strong social history, really. Brixton wouldn't be what it is now without the Black community and the way it's really sort of navigated a lot of the problems that have been in the past. And I'm working with a developer, so it's the first time I've worked with a private company to do something, and it sort of didn't resonate very well with me when they asked me to do it. I said no, then they came back, and I said no, and they came back. Anyway, cut a long story short, we have been doing some co-design of a new development in a place, and how do we get those people involved in that place? So we used a sortition process to do that, and we've been working with that community. And I just think those people came to the table, they didn't know anybody there. And I can't tell you the joy when last weekend, after quite a lot of discussion, you can imagine development isn't popular in a city of London where it's already built up, and they want a lot of things from the council. But I watched about 5 or 6 people go with one of the fellas there to see another workspace that they were talking about, and another place in Brixton. And these people are just really connected. And I suppose because I'm interested in the people that don't ordinarily get involved, we've got somebody in there who's got really quite strong learning. No, I don't know if it is a learning need, actually, but he's definitely got an element of autism going on, and he's definitely got Tourette's. So this person, when he first came to the group, would irritate people because he would keep talking when someone else was talking, and you could feel people going. And now you just see how lovely everybody is to him. He's just great. And, that kind of connection that's built in a group of, there's only 26 of them in that group. But when you see that happen, I was talking to the developer afterwards saying, you won't be interested in this, but this is the reason why I said yes, because I know that this stuff can happen. And he said, Susan, I can't tell you, I thought this was the biggest load of shit. And I thought, why on earth are we doing this crap? He said, and I've just been working with you, you've given me such a bloody headache. He said, but even my mum said to me this week, you didn't want to do that piece of work, and listen to you now, you're raving about it. And he said, I am. He said, I love it. I think it's great. So I think there's something, it's just a bit of a story about, it's a private company, they're probably not going to do a lot of goods to the local community, but they do care about building something. So the question is, will they really do anything that the community said? That's my job as the consultant, is to just keep pushing that. And I suppose you have to build those relationships with the people that commission you to trust that when they're these are the things I heard people say, and you're not responding to them, you're going into your normal space. So can I just challenge you back and say, this is what they're going to expect you to answer in the next session. So I don't know, there's a strange role as a consultant when you're passionate about that, in terms of making sure that voice of the most vulnerable doesn't get lost and is heard, and they see the beauty of what happens in that space. It's really great. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about, Andy, but that's the thing that sort of occupies a lot of my, I've done loads of work in policing as well, and how do you build relationships, but that was the thing I was mentioning in my breakout room, the thing that's really frustrating me, that people commission you to uncover that social capital. They commission you to build that, help you build that relationship, and they don't even turn up to a meeting sometimes. You know, why did you bother wasting public money for that? So anyway, that's my reflections.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for your story and your learnings. Natalia, you had your hand up.
Yeah. This might be somewhat connected to what you were just sharing, Susan, or at least adjacent. And one of the things I'm thinking about is, when you're going to bring a community together, even if it's just to have fun or be friendly, there's often a resistance to even being in the same room with people that you disagree with, you know, that you're on other sides of an issue with, and that there's that sense of that polarization and, you know, the duality, them versus me. And I'm wondering how you maybe approach that, how you welcome people in so that they feel comfortable. Like Andy was saying, there's so much resistance already to just like showing up and being in community, because it requires something of you, and it's not as easy as passive consumerism or just like clicking something online. So how do you get people to be willing to show up and be in community with people that they maybe strongly disagree with or feel animosity towards?
I mean, I can respond to that from my perspective. I mean, we're using the process that people use for citizens' assemblies. So they're paid the London living wage to be part of that. And they come because they didn't want development to happen in their area. But what's fascinating is when they're given the kind of challenges around that place, and they know that place better than anybody else. I heard them talking about going 20 floors up. Now, a developer wouldn't dream of anyone in the public suggesting 20 floors up. They've got a London plan which says 16 floors up. But they were sort of asking the question, how did we get to this place where the council want X number of homes? And if they want that many homes, they're going to have to go high. So I was just watching them and moving people around, you know, so they come for the incentive. Why do I want to be here? There's something personal about the local area, but also the payment for a lot of them. But then keeping moving people into different groups so they don't stay in the same group means they have to become quite tolerant of everybody. And then they watch people be really tolerant, and they feel like it raises the bar of tolerance, you know, and people are much more considerate of what an opposing view might be. It'd be interesting to see whether they stay together, because that's what was interesting me with this, is the container. Could they create a kind of container from this, is the bit that interests me, which is of no use to the developers, but it's the bit that interests me.
I'd like to respond, Natalia, just briefly. The notion of a parallel polis came originally from Václav Havel and Václav Bender, who were they were theatre directors living in Czechoslovakia under communist rule. And what they were doing was getting together regularly with other artists and dramatists, and just dreaming of a better future. And they were under very strict rules, so they didn't imagine that they would, you know, they didn't imagine that they had any power to build this thing. But they really wanted to invest in the dream, you know, they want to somehow put their own skills and agency to some use. So they dreamt up this new socio-economic political system, you know, while under communist rule. And it was just a very enjoyable thing to do. they felt kind of free to do it because they weren't ever going to have to put it into action, right? And then, you know, as history tells it, you know, the communist bloc fell, and Václav Havel became president of the Czech Republic. I mean, you know, this is obviously just pure Hollywood stuff, but it actually happened. And suddenly he was in a position to put all of this make it a reality, but actually he couldn't make it a reality because he found himself in this reality, the socio-economic political system that we have, which is a global one. And so as much as he tried to just make it happen, it couldn't just happen. However, because he had it as a, you know, because the people had it in their imagination and their world, in a way, their mind was there, they continued to do the work towards it with a lot of willingness and energy, you know, to keep moving towards the thing that they were trying to build. I think where I'm meeting you with, where you were asked, Susan, is we spent 2 years working, this is before we did the alternative, working with social workers in Scotland. We did a project called Reimagining Social Work. And it was a fantastic 2-year experiment in imagining a better social work system. And we, that was one of the most greatest, steepest learning curves of my life, actually, when I saw, number one, what social workers had to deal with, but number two, what they did deal with and what their resources were and where their imagination, you know, could save people's lives. They reimagined relationships. They lived alternative worlds, actually, because they were so committed to keeping people from falling off the edge of society that they created a kind of inner society that they held together themselves. I've never been so impressed by the creativity of a group of people as I was during that time with social workers. The crime was that after 2 years, they'd come up with this whole new system in a way. And then the Scottish executive was disbanded and the work went nowhere. It was, you know, it was literally a crime. Even the reports were more or less, you know, remaindered. You know, there was nowhere for them to go. However, we did meet, you know, we have met some of these people as the years gone by, and they've just taken what they learned and they're just infecting their systems. And to some extent, this is a slow burn rather than the one that we were hoping was really going to transform social work in Scotland. It didn't happen. But since then, you know, I put it in the chat there, the work of Hilary Cottam really, and something called Radical Help, also was a series of experiments in how to reorientate care in a system in a way that's built on relationship, meaning, you know, people come back to health through relationship, not through money, actually. Money thrown at something and measured and time bound and all of these things actually keeps people in the system. It doesn't get them out of the system. It just keeps them there because you're just generating work, really, and spending the money. But when you put relationship into it and you give people dedicated networks of help, then people can actually come out of the care system altogether in ways, you know. And so I really recommend that book. But ultimately, it's our own human development in this struggle. I feel it's accelerating the designs that are possible for communities to become the containers of the solutions that people need. But it's not something that'll happen overnight. I'm hoping artificial intelligence will be on our side, actually. But no guarantee.
Thank you, Indra. Thank you, Indra. How can communities become the container for transformation? We are almost at the top of the hour. Tom, you have been waiting patiently. You will have the last word. I'm just really inviting you to kind of close us out with something.
I can't do that with what I have to say. It's going to take 3 or 4 minutes, and it's not a closeout thing.
Okay, so you
If
had
anybody
wanted,
wants to stay and
okay,
hear that, I can do that. Somebody else can close out.
okay. So Andy, I'm going to invite us to have you close this out. Thank you so much, Indra. Thank you so much, everybody who's been here, all of your rich contributions, Susan Ritchie, Susan Clark, Laura, Natalia, everybody who's been contributing to this conversation. And whether I've mentioned you or I haven't mentioned you, over to you, Andy. Please bring us home.
Yeah, thanks so much, Indra. It's been really great to have your presentation, your work, and the vision, what you're trying to achieve. I think it's really amazing thing. Yeah, just to say that we're going to be doing these calls every month. So everybody who's here tonight are very welcome to come along another time. The whole setup is completely a voluntary affair. But if anybody wishes to donate to the Co-Intelligence Institute to continue this kind of work, and you feel like donating, I'm going to just put a link here in the chat. No obligation, but if you feel moved to, then that's up to you. But that just leaves me to say once again, thank you to Indra, and have a good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and hope to see you again.
And save the chat before you leave if you're interested in its contents.
Yeah, and I just want to mention that Laura has put an invitation to stay in touch with Indra to see the synergy between the work that she's doing and what Indra is doing. And we really invite and welcome any ongoing efforts at synergy between everybody who comes in touch with our network, because that's what we really want to do, is promote co-intelligence. So with that, Tom, I am going to make you host. Indra, I'm going to say thank you again. You are very welcome to stay, but no obligation. Thank you. Thank you for all the
go as well.
Yeah, Andy. Oh, it's late where you guys are at.
It's late here in London.
It's late where you are. Thank you, Andy, so much. And it's 3 hours earlier where you are, Tom. Let me just find where to make you host. Okay. You are now the host of this gathering.
Thanks. What I want to share was from my Y2K community organizing back in '99. I ran across a story of an alternative economy that developed in Oakland, California during the Depression, when an extremely high percentage of the population was unemployed, and the economy, the regular economy, was shaken seriously. People could not get what they needed at all. And a local money was created that was effective. A whole pile of other economic things were created that were effective. And it operated, I think, for a couple of years. And then the New Deal came and it offered jobs and money. And the whole local economy came apart. So sort of recognizing the potency of what we call the system, that the system and money has a universal, you can get anything with money, different from barter, as there's a sense of its liquidity. It's like digital points. You can make words with it, you can make pictures with it, you can all these little pinpoints on the screen. There's a way it can translate into everything, and that has a level of convenience and security and all that. When things collapse, people look for alternatives. When you no longer have that kind of fluid need satisfaction, pseudo satisfaction capacity. So I just take that in my own mind, the kind of challenge there is for us trying, because the collapses that are impending now have a more terminal feeling to them, and the sense that if we don't have something in place that can deal with the whole spectrum of things that the system in all its complexity has been designed to deliver, despite all of its oppressive and horrible downsides and crushing of the human spirit and all that, it's really good at providing physical stuff, which is also its weakness, because providing physical stuff is fucking with the earth. But it's a conundrum I very seldom hear a challenge taken up. I remember locally when I got here right after Y2K talking about, or right before Y2K, talking about, are we willing to take on the role the police have, particularly in an armed society? It's like these are hot, challenging questions. What is physical community? What's healthcare? What are all these things? And how do we deal with the people who don't like what's happening and all that? There's a way in which we can be in a sandbox creating our ideal worlds. And there's a way in which we take seriously what's coming down the pike as a much bigger challenge. And I don't know how to serve it. I just know that for me, holding it is part of the task, and holding it without letting it crush all the things we'd really like to do in our alternative visions. That's what I wanted to share.
I mean, I think it's why I like the notion of a parallel, because quite often when people are designing something new, they think they're going to overthrow the system. And so they're designing always for something that maybe will fail, a bit like watching Extinction Rebellion. The premise was they were going to overthrow, decision-making process. But if you're actually designing for parallel, then you have this both and, mentality, that you can do something which you will enjoy growing, that will, give you a chance to develop your creativity, build the relationships, do interesting, experimental things, be an entrepreneur, all of that stuff. The technology should help us to do that, but without ever really thinking that you're going to exit the system. You're building a relationship with the system. So something like flat pack democracy, for example, is a good example of what I would call a parallel polis, because the community was there first, doing its thing. It had its own market, it had its own festival, it had its, various conversations happening in Frome. But they got fed up with the council, and so they elected somebody from the people to represent the people in the council. And then you had like some, it was like a Trojan horse, you had were now in the council, with the agreement that those people elected in that way would leave the decision-making processes to the people. That's the parallel polis that we imagine is possible. So you don't overinvest in either of those things, but you rely on some sort of relationship between them. And one is really shaping the other ultimately because it's more popular.
I just was reminded that in my watershed experience, this is a Great Peace March in 1986, which was a totally anarchic, nobody in charge community of 400 people walking across the country.
Yeah.
We would arrive in a city, we'd set up our tents wherever we gotten permission to set them up, and the cops would show up and they'd say, okay, can we talk to whoever's in charge? And we used to say, nobody's in charge, and it made the cops really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So we elected this person who sort of volunteered to be our mayor. She had absolutely no power. He was a PR front for this whole anarchic operation. The cops would say, we talk to whoever's in charge. Yeah, go get her. She would talk about, okay, we're going to set up a peace pole in the park and blah, blah, blah. But having that front,
Yeah.
Anyway, Charlie.
Yeah. Anyway.
Thanks for hanging, Indra. So while you're here, I was just curious. So yeah, my sort of heart went out with the story about the work that didn't go anywhere, just sort of in the dumpster. And so just to maybe flash a quick light on this, I guess it was the Reimagining Social Work 2-year experiment. And so I guess the question is, maybe it hopefully could relate or will relate to the CAN sort of now and tomorrow, but in terms of the documentation, I mean, you have the story, of course, you have the experience, but there must be more that's not actually lost and that could be perhaps harvested and revived in some ways, at least to tell about it in a more clear way. So maybe that already exists, but yeah. So group memory, maybe to put it like that. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but that's a kind of almost like a faith issue, you know, Charles, because I don't believe anything's wasted. I think everything is ultimately evolutionary, and that we can't go straight to the answer. You know, we are constantly developing and designing this answer, but that's one of the reasons I refer to this watershed, you know, shift with the internet. Not because it actually was like on a day this suddenly started to happen. I actually believe that the internet only became what it was because of the evolution of people, the development of people ready now to use technology in this way. And they turned it into this, you know. Mark Zuckerberg launched Facebook, you know, for completely different reasons than what it became to people when they started to use it. They started to use it for, you know, for building groups and sharing experience and being emotional in ways they'd never expected to even acknowledge emotion. You know, like all of this stuff happened that Mark Zuckerberg would never have designed for. He just opened the door to something. And I'm so curious. We're all in this moment right now where we really have no idea what's going to happen next with this artificial intelligence, and some people are frightened. But you know, people were frightened of the atom bomb as well. I mean, so we actually don't know what it's going to generate in terms of human response. And one of the things I'm quite sure it will generate is an appetite for human interconnection, because there will be so much distrust of the you know, digital space. Literally, people won't know what is true and what is not true. Is that a real person, not a real person? They'll be pretty hungry for each other as real human beings, and I think that's a new growth area that we hadn't even anticipated, you know, but I can already see happening. Yet, you know, it has such power, and who knows who's going to put it to good use and in what ways. Believe me, you won't read about it in the mainstream press. The mainstream press will only tell us what's going wrong or what's dangerous about it and how, you know, how appalling, you know, but it's the same. You only ever read about social media as a disaster, but it's the most important thing actually for people who have an intention. So yeah, that's what we're busy doing, right? It's building intention and being being proactive and designing our own worlds, and you know.
Thank you. I think I just have to tag on briefly in terms of the languaging. Like, this is a whole rabbit hole that Tom and I, and a bit now Kalia and I are going down, so-called AI. But my latest thing is informed by a chat with someone I don't know really who it is, even what their name is, but the insight into the languaging. So quickly, you know, like it's all artificial when it comes to talking about intelligence. There's no agreement anyway. So this is kind of my thing that struck me when the tsunami came with the GPT being released more widely, and I'm saying, well, you know, there's no agreement on intelligence anyway. It's all artificial, but let's just skip ahead to wisdom anyway. But yeah. But just to be more precise, I think is another way to put it. You know, it's not really artificial versus natural. It's or man and machine. I mean, like, we can't really draw the lines as far as I'm concerned. So I'm just trying to get more accurate in the languaging, and I think that the AI, you know, sort of specter or whatever, it's sort of. It's out there. It's a meme, but it's not very useful, actually, personally for me. So thanks.
Oh, where's everybody?
Yeah, screen's off time. I think I probably should go, because it would be polite to leave at some point.
We got you.
Away.
I'll join you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Indra.
Yeah, thank you so much, and see you again soon, I'm sure.